Here we go. Let's come to our mat and we're going to lay down nice and flat. So we'll find our neutral spine, that space between our low back and the floor. And once we find that space, that little tunnel, that basically if you draw a straight line through your belly button all the way through the back, that's where that little gap is going to be. And then we want to drop the rib cage down, which may mean that the shoulders roll forward a little bit. And we're going to drop the shoulders down, pull the rib cage in, and we'll reach the arms nice and long. We'll square the feet and the legs off with our sit bones. I want you guys to push into your feet, and then I want you to hover your hips just a little bit up off of the mat so you feel the abdominals engage, your back extensors are firing, you're feeling that tension in the back of the leg. And we're staying in neutral as we kind of work that hover of the hip. And then we'll drop the hip back to the mat. Reset the arms, pull the rib cage, engage through the abdominals, push through the feet, lift just a little bit up off of the mat. Staying nice and tight in the core. Neck is long with the chest open and collarbone spreading wide, and then hips return back to the mat. Again, arms reach and stretch out nice and long, and hips lift for the hover. And slow to lower. We're going to work into a pelvic tilt. For those of you that are staying away from flexion, you're just going to keep working those little hip lifts up off of the mat. On the exhale, we tilt the hips back to imprint the low back. Flat against the mat, we're finding that hollow, that scoop, that pull of the abdominals up under the rib cage. And then we'll rock all the way back towards the tailbone with the arms reaching nice and long. And then hips will tilt. Collarbone is spreading wide. We've got that nice length across the top of the shoulders to draw them down away from the neck and away from your ears. As we're tilting the hips or lifting the hips, it's just the lower half of our body that's moving across from the back. So from mid-ribs, bottom of the rib cage down, we're going to find that movement. Feel the weight of the shoulder blades, the back of the rib cage connect to your mat. And we'll do two more, either pelvic tilts or those small hip lifts, staying in that neutral spine if you're avoiding flexion. And returning to neutral. Taking a moment to reset the body, feel that length and elongation through the spine as you stretch across the mat. And staying in a neutral spine, we're going to lift the hips up into our full shoulder bridge. Pausing for a breath or two at the top, and then slow to lower. We're hinging at the hip and right across the mid-ribs. Those are our two movement lines, because we need the fold at the mid-ribs just below the bra to bring the hips up so we don't add any extension up into the mid and upper back. And then the other hinge is at the hip to bring the hips up towards the ceiling and to lower them back to the mat. As the hips are lifting and we're folding at the mid-ribs, the knees are going to move forward towards the toes. So we hinge at the ankle. One more neutral spine bridge. And then we're going to move into our pelvic tilt with our pelvic curl. So again, if you're avoiding flexion, you'll stay with your neutral spine. To add the articulation, we're going to tilt the hips back to imprint and then begin to scoop and curl, lifting the hips up off the mat, one piece of the back at a time. And then to return to the floor, we curl down through the mid-ribs. We stretch the spine as we replace the back nice and long across your mat. Nice and slow as you roll up and down, feeling that balance between the right and the left side of your back and your hips, coming on and off of the mat. Last one. And we'll reset back to neutral. Lengthen the arms nice and long down the side of the body, bringing the right leg up to tabletop position, bracing strong through the abdominals, especially those left obliques as we hinge at the hip to lower the foot to the mat for these single leg lifts and lowers. And leg pauses at tabletop. I'm going to tilt the hips back and imprint the low back, flattening the lumbar spine flat against the mat, and then continue with those leg lowers. So as you can see, kind of our theme for today is we're going to start in a neutral spine, and then we're going to add some lumbar flexion. So for those of you that should avoid lumbar flexion because of any type of orthopedic issues in your spine or osteopenia, osteoporosis, you'll stay in neutral and not go into this flexed spine position. Right foot's going to come back to the mat, set in line with the sit bone, and we rock the hips back towards the tailbone to create that space at the small of the back, and left leg comes to tabletop. Hinging at the hip, we slow to lower the foot. We've got that good engagement on the left side on our right side of our torso, to engage those right obliques. The extensors along the right side of our back. We've got good balance from hip to hip. And then the left leg will pause at tabletop, and we'll add our pelvic tilt to flatten and stretch the back along the mat, maintaining that connection of our lumbar spine against the floor as that left leg hinges. For those of you that can add the flexion to your movement, it's nice to know what neutral spine and that flexion feels like. Especially if you feel in some exercises you need to take some pressure off your hip flexors or off your low back, you can add a little bit of that pelvic tilt to kind of decompress and take that torque and that pressure off those muscle groups. We'll rest the left foot to the mat, rock back to neutral, and we'll squeeze our feet and our legs together, bring our arms out to a T position, and we're going to rock our legs over to the right, anchoring the left shoulder blade, the left side of the rib cage, and then drawing our ribs together, belly to the back as we rock back to center. We're staying in that neutral spine position. So as we come back to center, there's the space at the small of the back. The rotation's coming through the mid-ribs, just below the chest, at the base of the shoulder blades. The more we twist, the more we need to draw the rib cage in to prevent any extension traveling into the mid or upper back. And that will also allow us to engage those upper segments of abdominal muscles in and around the base of the rib cage for better control and stability. back to center, we'll pause, tilt the hips back, imprint the low back, and we twist. Now feeling the low back connect to the mat as you cross and move over to the other side. And you can feel the difference in the stretch across the chest, across the shoulders and the arms with that pelvic tilt. One more to each side, drawing the abdominals strong to your back to maintain that tilt of the hips. And we pause at center, return to a little gap at the small of the back, neutral spine. We'll bring our legs to tabletop position. Ribs and abdominals knit in, and we're going to alternate for leg changes. Hinging at the hip, nice and smooth glide and change from leg to leg. And we'll pause at center. Hips tilt back. We imprint and flatten the low back down against the mat and return to those leg changes. Harder pull of the abdominals in to keep the back fully connected to the mat as the legs move. Two more each side. And we'll rest the feet and return to neutral. Fingers are going to interlace. We'll bring our hands behind our head. Slide the shoulders down the back. The elbows, we want to find that sweet spot where we're not flaring the ribs or overarching the upper and mid back. We're going to work into our chest lift, keeping the space at the small of the back. We fold on the exhale to lift the chest up, bringing our line of sight up over the knees without sending the head forward or jutting the chin out and up. Slow on the next exhale to return back to the mat. Finding that deep fold across the mid-ribs. There's light pressure of the feet connecting you to the floor, so the hips don't shift out of position. Pausing at the bottom, hips tilt back, creating that flexion. We're going to hold the pelvic tilt and fold and lift. Slow in the reset, maintaining that connection of our low back to the floor. Two more. And reset to the mat. Arms return out to a T, gap the low back, and we're going to bring the legs to tabletop. Holding nice and strong and squeezing through inner thigh, moving into our spine twist. We move the legs over and onto the right hip and back to center. keeping the space at the small of the back as we rock hip to hip. We're leaning the legs to the side. We don't want the knees to lead the charge over to the side. A lot of folks will get to this position, they want to go to the side, and they twist the legs first. We don't want to twist the legs. They're staying in the same plane, and we're just tipping. We're laying over to that side. The whole side of the leg is moving at once as we rock from hip to hip. And we twist through the mid-ribs, drawing a straight line across the ceiling with the legs. Coming to center, I'm going to add a pelvic tilt, flattening the low back, and then twist again. Feeling the small of the back, make contact as you rock to the other side. One more right, then left. And we'll bring the feet back to the mat. Knees are bent with feet to the floor, little gap at the small of the back. We'll bring our right leg up to tabletop and then extend it up towards the ceiling. And we're going to inhale to lower the leg and exhale to lift. Reaching the leg nice and long towards the ceiling. We'll bring the right leg up, bend the knee to tabletop so you can create the pelvic tilt and flatten the spine against the mat, and we'll extend that right leg up again and lower. And you can see and feel, you get a lot more movement of the leg, or it appears to give you more movement because of the flexion in your low back. So that's why when we're stretching the hamstring, or we're doing any stretch at all for the most part, we really want to achieve that neutral spine, that clean postural alignment, so we can isolate that stretch to those muscle groups at the joint. Bending the right knee, placing the foot to the mat, we rock back to neutral to bring the left leg to tabletop and extend it to the ceiling, and inhale to lower, and exhale to lift. We want to keep the gap at the small of the back. Left leg comes to tabletop. We can add the pelvic tilt, extend the leg back up, and we lower and lift. One more. And we'll bend the knee, place the foot back to the mat, return to neutral, and fingers once again interlace, bringing the hands behind the head. We're going to go into our chest lift with rotation, keeping the space to begin with. At the small of the back, we fold and lift the chest up, twisting through the midribs over and onto the right shoulder blade, and across over to the other side onto the left shoulder, and back to center. Nice and smooth rotation, working side to side. to center. Add that pelvic tilt, flatten the low back. There's a slight little lift in the tailbone, and we twist. And remember, at any point, you can always avoid the flexion. You can stay in neutral. Two more to each side. And reset back to the floor. Arms return long to the side with the gap at the low back. Right leg extends up towards the ceiling. We work a down circle. We're going to come down through the center. Right leg is going to circle out, back up and around. We want to maintain that gap. I'm going to place hands at the hip. It just helps me to track my hip position, my back position. Make sure the opposite leg doesn't try to twist out of position to help with the stability of the movement. And then we'll change the circle direction, staying in a neutral spine, keeping the gap. One more. And we'll place the right foot to the mat. We're going to rock our hips back, create that flexion. And then right leg comes back up to that straight long leg to the ceiling, and we work back into that down circle. Collarbone is spreading wide, rib cage is knitted in, and we change our circle direction. Finding that stability in the left leg. One more. And we'll bend that right knee. Place the foot to the mat. I just want you to drop the right leg out to the side. That kind of single-sided butterfly stretch. Anchor your left hip against the mat, because with that leg falling out to the side, the back, the pelvis is going to want to twist. So try to keep the weight on that left pocket so you isolate that stretch to the hip flexor, adductor, inner thigh muscles. Holding for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Bringing the right foot and leg back in line with the sit bone will create the gap at the low back. Left leg comes straight up to the ceiling, and we work our down circle with the left leg. Maintaining that space at the small of the back. And changing directions. Bending the left knee, placing the foot to the mat, we rock back into that pelvic tilt, and we extend the left leg once again. We work back into our down circles. And changing the circle direction. 2. And we'll bend the knee, place the foot down. We're going to drop that left knee out to the side for that single-sided butterfly stretch. Anchor your right hip. Make sure that the right leg stays squared off with the hip as you maintain that weight on the right side. Holding for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Leg comes back up to tabletop, and we return to that neutral spine. Bringing both legs up to tabletop, hands are going to rest on the side of the knees, and we're going to fold at the mid-ribs to lift the head, neck, and chest. Keeping the legs in tabletop, that little gap at the small of the back as you fold deeper at the mid-ribs. And then we're going to go right leg reaches out nice and strong. And back to center. Left leg extends. And back to tabletop. Alternate leg to leg, finding that full extension of the knee as you reach the leg further. And we'll pause at tabletop. Drop the shoulders, the head and the neck back to the mat. We're going to pull the knees in a little bit more. Create that flexion at the small of the back, and then lift the chest up. We're going to decompress the back and continue with those single leg stretches. Pulling the knee in closer to the chest. Two more each side. And knees hug in, drop the head back, head and neck twist to look out over that right shoulder. Shoulders dropping down the back, and then head and neck twist left. One more to each side. Really let the neck and the shoulders decompress and stretch. And we'll come back to center. Taking a moment to reset the spine in a nice neutral position. Legs return to tabletop. We'll fold and lift at the mid-ribs to bring the head, neck, and chest up. Moving into our double leg stretch, we're going to inhale to open. Arms go overhead, legs go forward and back. You can always work higher to the ceiling. As you go lower to the floor, you increase the challenge on the abdominals. And we'll pause. Drop the head and the shoulders back. Pull the knees in towards the chest. Create that flexion at the small of the back. And then we'll fold and lift. And we're going to stay nice and tight for this double leg stretch. So I create that nice rounding of the spine. And inhale, legs and arms open, keeping the rounding. And pull back, hug in. Three, 2, 1. Dropping back. We'll go into our full butterfly stretch, soles of the feet together, knees fall out to the side, arms come out to a T position, and head and neck looks out right. And head and neck twists and looks out left. One more to each side. And slow to unwind. Feet are going to start in a bent position, knees bent, feet flat on the mat, little gap at the small of the back. Arms are going to come back overhead. We're going to start working through our hundreds progression, starting in neutral, moving to our flexion. And we exhale to fold and lift, head, neck, and chest. And inhale back. We're keeping the gap, we're keeping the space. One more in neutral. And hips tilt. Flatten and imprint the low back. Feel that great stretch along the underarm. And exhale to fold and lift. We keep that flexion in the small of our back. We're moving in and out of flexion at the mid-ribs through the thoracic spine. Just at the base of the shoulder blades. One more. And we'll reset, let the arms stretch up overhead. And we rock back to neutral. Little gap at the small of the back. Legs come up to tabletop. And arms glide forward as we lift the chest. Bringing our line of sight there between the knees, between the inner thighs. Stay weighted towards the tailbone to keep that space at your low back from the mat. One more. And arms stretch up overhead, feet down to the mat, and then we rock the hips back. Feel the flexion and the space and the stretch along the spine. We bring our legs to tabletop position, and arms flow forward to lift the head, neck, and chest, keeping the low back flat against the mat for the second half. We're creating that space between the vertebrae with the flexion. Two more. And rest to the mat. Left leg extends out. We'll pull our right knee to our chest. Create a gap at the small of the back. And then we'll take that right knee cross-body over towards that left shoulder. So the right hip can open. Head and neck can even twist and rotate side to side. Get a little neck stretch. Decompress the upper traps. And we'll switch legs. Right leg extends out nice and long, keeping the gap at the small of the back. We hug that left knee in. And then the left leg crosses the center line over towards that right shoulder. Still maintaining that gap to isolate the stretch into the hip. And then head and neck can twist to look side to side. Coming to center, we bend the knees, placing the feet flat to find our neutral spine. And then legs come to tabletop. We're going to go into our single leg extensions with our chest lift. We're going to hold the chest lift so we can extend the right leg, then the left leg before we do a full reset. Arms reach up overhead if you can avoid the rib flare. And then arms flow forward. We lift the head, neck, and chest to pause. Right leg straightens and back. Left leg straightens and and back. Arms come up overhead as you drop the shoulders and the head to the mat. Exhale, fold and lift. Pause. Right leg, left leg, and back. Nice and slow on the reset. One more in the neutral spine position. And arms come overhead, feet come down. We'll rock the hips back, feel the low back, make contact to the mat, and then legs to tabletop. Arms come forward as we fold and lift. Right leg, and then left leg. Keeping the back in contact, we reset the upper body and fold and lift. Deep fold at the mid-ribs while we hold the flexion at the lumbar spine. Reaching long with each leg. One more rep. And we'll hug the knees in towards the chest, reach for the toes. Knees apart, about shoulder width, and then we'll rock from hip to hip. Coming back to center. Left foot down, right ankle is going to cross the left leg. Gap the low back. Bring the left leg to tabletop. Reach through for your figure four stretch. Maintaining that space at the small of the back. And you can twist the right leg in the hip to create more stretch. And then we'll change sides. Right foot down, left ankle crosses that right leg. Make sure you've gapped the small of the back. And then right leg comes up to tabletop. And left leg twists in the hip. One more. And we'll uncross the legs. Straighten the legs out along the mat. Arms are going to reach up overhead and we're going to roll up to a seated position. Arms flow forward, head, neck, chest lifts. And we curl and roll up. We stretch out nice and long over the legs. And we curl up and restack. Let's do a little bit of our lunge stretch into pigeon to finish off. Right foot comes forward with the left knee down. Kneeling or standing nice and tall. And we're going to press the hips forward and down. Drop the shoulders, pull the rib cage in. Pull your belly to your back. Engage that left glute for that deeper hip flexor stretch. And then we'll bring our hands down, walk that right foot across. We'll lay the leg down. And stretch that right hip. Up into that lunge stretch, press the hips forward. Glide the shoulders down. Squeeze that right glute to open the hip further. And then we're going to walk that left foot across and lay it down for your pigeon stretch. A little bit of rocking from side to side. And we'll slide the leg back, sit back into your rest position with the arms reaching and stretching long overhead. And exhale, we curl up and restack the back. All right, guys. Awesome work today. Thank you so much.